Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1, The Ship of the Forgotten. It's the middle of the night when a distress signal reaches the coastal town of Malmstrom Harbor. The signal, weak and garbled, is traced back to a location in the middle of the ocean, far beyond the usual shipping routes. Desperate for answers, the harbor sends a team of experienced sailors and a paranormal investigator, Olivia Turner, to investigate. They are told to be back within 48 hours, as there have been rumors of an ancient ghost ship haunting the waters beyond the harbor for decades. Many ships that venture too far never return, but no one is prepared for what they will discover. As Olivia and the crew board the Seawraith, the ship in distress, they find the vessel eerily silent. No signs of life. No sounds from the ship. Just a cold, chilling fog that clings to the vessel like a heavy blanket. The captain of the Seawraith, once a proud and reliable man, is found lying dead at his post, his eyes wide open in terror. The crew struggles to understand what happened. It's as if the ship was frozen in time. Food rots but remains untouched. The charts on the deck show a route that shouldn't exist. The further they investigate, the more they realize that something is wrong in a way that stretches beyond the physical realm. Olivia discovers an old, tattered journal hidden in the captain's cabin. The journal recounts disturbing events leading up to the disappearance of the original crew. They had sailed through a storm and encountered something dark in the water. Something that followed them, unseen but always present. At night, the crew heard whispers, and many began to disappear, one by one. As Olivia reads more, the ship itself seems to come alive. The air grows colder. The ship creaks in unnatural ways. The crew begins to hear strange noises, footsteps on the deck, whispers in the dark, and the sounds of chains dragging across the floor. Tensions rise, and Olivia realizes they may be trapped on the ship, bound to the same fate as the long-lost crew. As the crew searches for answers, a storm brews on the horizon, trapping them on the Seawraith for longer than expected. During the night, Olivia and the crew experience a terrifying encounter with the ship's ghostly inhabitants. Shadows move in ways they shouldn't. Figures appear and vanish before they can even be acknowledged. One by one, the crew starts to be haunted by their deepest fears. The captain, still dead, rises from his cabin and begins muttering unintelligible words, warning Olivia that they are being followed. The air grows thick with a sense of impending doom. Olivia begins to see strange symbols carved into the ship's walls. Symbols that appear to be connected to an ancient curse. Desperate, Olivia contacts the harbor, but the signal cuts out before she can explain the full extent of their situation. Olivia and the remaining crew come to the shocking realization that the Seawraith is no ordinary ghost ship. It is a prison for the souls of those who failed to escape it. The ship is cursed, bound to sail the seas for eternity, ferrying souls trapped within it. As the storm rages, the crew is assaulted by spectral apparitions of the ship's past victims, some trying to warn them, others trying to drag them into the abyss. In a final desperate act, Olivia uncovers the truth about the ship's last voyage. It was not a simple accident but a deliberate curse placed upon it by an ancient cult that sought to control the seas. The cult believed the ship was the key to summoning a monstrous entity from the deep. In a harrowing final confrontation, Olivia and the surviving crew members must make a choice: destroy the ship and risk their souls being lost forever, or accept their fate and join the cursed crew for eternity. As the storm reaches its peak, A massive shadow rises from the sea. An ancient and terrifying creature seeking to claim the souls of all aboard. Olivia makes the ultimate sacrifice, using the journal's clues to break the curse. But in doing so, she seals her fate, ensuring that the Sea Wraith will never again be a vessel of suffering. The ship disappears into the fog, leaving only the haunting sound of chains dragging across the deck. As Olivia's voice echoes one final warning, the sea never forgets. It always calls back the lost. Story 2, The Phantom Horizon. It was supposed to be a routine oceanic survey. A simple research mission across the Caribbean Sea. But when Dr. Martin Blake, an experienced marine biologist, and his team boarded the salvage quest for their expedition, they had no idea that the deep waters would reveal something far worse than anything they'd studied before. For years, rumors of ghost ships drifting across the oceans had fascinated Martin. He'd laughed them off as folklore. But as their vessels sailed through the night, surrounded by thick mist, the atmosphere shifted. An eerie presence seemed to follow them, as though the ocean itself had become a living thing, waiting to consume them. By the time they stumbled across the horizon, a ship that should have been lost to time, it was already too late. It was just before dawn when they first spotted it, the horizon. An enormous, rusted ship with no lights, no movement, and no signs of life. It seemed to be floating in place, locked in time, like an abandoned ghost adrift in the blackness. "We need to investigate," said Martin, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. The crew, though hesitant, agreed. They anchored the salvage quest at a safe distance and lowered the small dinghy to approach the eerie vessel. As they drew nearer, the air became unnaturally still. The ocean's usual rhythm, a constant crashing of waves and the hum of life, was gone. The silence was suffocating. When they boarded the horizon, they found it as if frozen in time. There were no signs of struggle or destruction. But everything seemed wrong. The ship's deck was covered in a thick layer of salt and decay, and the crew's quarters were eerily neat, as though the people had simply vanished mid-task. The most unsettling part was the faint sound, like whispers, coming from the lower decks. "Do you hear that?" one of the crew members, Sarah, asked, her voice trembling. "It's just the wind," Martin assured her, though he wasn't sure himself. But as they moved deeper into the ship, the whispers grew louder. Now distinctly voices, pleading, desperate. The deeper they ventured into the horizon, the more the ship seemed to pull them into its grip. The corridors were narrow and dark, the only illumination from the flickering flashlight beams that seemed to fade the longer they shone. The first sign that something wasn't right came when Sarah found a journal in the captain's quarters. Its pages yellowed and worn with age. "Look at this," she said, her voice shaken. "This is from over 30 years ago." Martin took the journal from her hands, flipping through the pages. The entries were strange, at first documenting a normal voyage, then slowly devolving into madness. The captain spoke of the horizon becoming cursed, of hearing voices in the water, of crew members disappearing without a trace. The last entry was cryptic: "We're trapped in a loop. There's no escape. They're waiting for us beneath the waves." Before Martin could say anything, the ship seemed to groan. It was a low, guttural sound that made the walls tremble. "We need to leave," Sarah insisted, looking panicked. But when they turned to head back to the dinghy, the corridors had changed. The ship's layout was no longer familiar, as though the vessel had reconfigured itself. The exit they had come through was no longer there. Panic set in. "We're stuck," Martin muttered, realizing they were now completely disoriented. And then they heard it again, the whispers, growing louder, now accompanied by soft footsteps. As the crew members scattered to search for another exit, they began to disappear one by one. First, Greg, the youngest of the team, vanished without a trace. Then, James, the navigator, was found in the lower hold, eyes wide with terror, his body frozen in an unnatural position, as though he had been drained of life. The crew was dwindling, and the whispers seemed to be closing in, surrounding them from all directions. Sarah, now visibly shaken, clung to Martin's side as they hurried through the darkened halls, trying to find a way out. "It's not the ship that's haunted," Sarah whispered through trembling lips. "It's the water. The sea, it's alive." Martin didn't want to believe her. But there was something undeniable in the air. Something ancient, something vast, was lurking beneath the waves. He could feel it, pressing against the ship like a malevolent force. That's when they found the door, the one marked in faded red paint with a symbol none of them recognized. With no other choice, they forced it open. Inside was a large chamber, unlike any other part of the ship. The walls were lined with old nautical equipment, and in the center of the room lay a massive, ancient-looking artifact, an obsidian stone, covered in seaweed and barnacles. It seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The whispers were deafening now. And suddenly, the room filled with shadowed figures, creatures formed from the very darkness of the ocean, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't have come," one of them whispered in a voice that wasn't quite human. "The horizon is ours." The battle for survival became a nightmare as the crew fought against unseen forces. Every time they thought they were safe, the ship seemed to shift again, trapping them in new, more terrifying spaces. Martin, Sarah, and the remaining survivors tried desperately to escape. But the ship was no longer merely a vessel, it was a sentient entity, alive with the spirits of those it had claimed over the centuries. In the final moments, as the ocean raged violently outside, Martin realized the truth: the ship was cursed. Yes, but it was a vessel for something far darker. It was not just a ghost ship, but a prison, holding the souls of those who had ventured too far into its waters. As the survivors made one last desperate bid for freedom, they reached the deck only to find it completely engulfed in fog. The salvage quest was nowhere to be seen, as if it had never existed. The sea had swallowed it whole. The final scene was chaos. Sarah, standing at the edge of the ship, looking out at the black horizon, as a chilling voice whispered from the depths, "You will join us." And with that, the mist consumed the ship. The ocean claimed it again, dragging it back into the deep, where it would remain until the next unlucky souls wandered too close. The horizon had vanished once more, but its legacy lived on. Those few who survived the encounter were never the same. The whispers, the darkness of the ocean, and the horrifying truth about the horizon would haunt their dreams forever. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the ship waited patiently for its next victims. Story 3: The Forgotten Vessel. The sea has always been a place of mystery, vast, unforgiving, and filled with secrets lost to time. But none were as chilling as the tale of the Archelia, a ghost ship that had been missing for over 50 years, only to reappear one stormy night under the most unnatural of circumstances. This story begins with a crew of desperate survivors, a cursed vessel, and an entity that haunts the waters beyond the horizon. Captain Grant Davidson had been in the maritime industry long enough to know when something wasn't right. The weather forecast had promised a calm, uneventful trip as his ship, the Tempest, sailed through the Atlantic. Yet, the ocean seemed unnervingly quiet, its surface glassy, as if holding its breath. At 3:27 a.m., the radio crackled to life. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday, this is the Archelia. We're lost, something's on board, we can't escape it." The transmission was garbled, distant, and followed by a deep, hollow silence. Davidson's stomach twisted. The Archelia had been presumed lost after it vanished in 1973. Never to be seen or heard from again. No one had ever found a trace. Now, here it was, calling for help from the abyss. "We need to find it," Davidson ordered. "Prepare to change course." His crew was skeptical, yet eager. The mystery of the Archelia had haunted the maritime community for decades. If they could find it, perhaps they could claim the reward, and the fame. But Davidson had a sinking feeling in his gut. One that said there was something far more sinister waiting for them than any treasure. After 2 days of searching, the Tempest finally spotted it, a silhouette in the distance. The Archelia was there, anchored eerily in the center of the ocean, shrouded in a thick fog. As the ship drew closer, the sun seemed to retreat behind dark clouds, plunging the water into a twilight gloom. The deck of the Archelia was abandoned, its once pristine white paint now peeling and stained with rust. The ship was eerily still, and the air was thick with the stench of saltwater and decay. Davidson hesitated, standing at the helm, as if the vessel itself was warning him to stay away. The radio crackled again. But this time, it wasn't a distress call. A low, guttural voice reverberated through the speaker, as if speaking directly to his soul. "Leave, now, or join us." Before Davidson could react, the ship lurched violently, as if struck by an unseen force. The crew was thrown to the floor, and the fog thickened, swallowing them whole. In the disorienting haze, the figures of the crew members appeared, pale, with hollow eyes and skin stretched tightly over their bones. They were the lost crew of the Archelia. Are you alive?" one of the crew members, First Mate Peter, whispered in disbelief. But their eyes betrayed the truth. They were not alive. As Davidson and his crew boarded the Archelia, the air grew heavier. Each step on the rotting deck felt like an echo of something long dead. The ship had been abandoned, but it was not empty. There was a presence that seemed to lurk in every shadow, every corner, just out of sight. The first clue came when one of the crew members, Jake, stumbled across a room filled with photographs of the original Archelia crew. The faces of the sailors were eerily familiar to those of the Tempest crew. Their eyes stared back, as if frozen in time. "Davidson, we need to leave," Jake pleaded, a nervous tremor in his voice. "This place, it's like they're still here." But not really. The captain's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, a rhythmic tapping, like a slow march down the corridor. They followed the sound, reaching the galley where a figure stood facing away from them. A dark silhouette. "Who are you?" Davidson demanded. The figure slowly turned, its face a grotesque mask of rot and decay. It smiled, a grin that stretched unnaturally wide. "We are the ones who never left." The crew froze. The figure's hollow voice seemed to echo throughout the ship. They were all cursed, just like you will be. As the crew delved deeper into the ship's labyrinthine halls, they discovered something far worse than they had imagined. The Archelia was not just haunted, it was a prison. A place where the souls of the dead were trapped in an endless loop of torment. The captain realized too late that they had not been brought here by chance. The ship had been waiting for them, its cursed presence drawing the tempest toward it. One by one, the crew members began to disappear, their screams echoing through the ship's hollow corridors. Those left behind could hear them, their voices calling, begging for help from the walls themselves. Davidson was the last man standing, alone in the captain's quarters. The radio crackled once more. "You've seen what we are," the voice said. "And now you will join us. Forever." The last thing Davidson saw before the darkness overtook him was the skeletal crew of the Archelia surrounding him. Their hollow eyes were full of silent screams, begging him to join them in the endless suffering. The Tempest never returned to port. No trace was ever found of the ship or its crew. Months later, another ship passed through the same waters. A distress call came through. Faint but clear. "Mayday, Mayday, we are lost," the Archelia, it calls. And in the distance, a silhouette appeared on the horizon. A ghost ship, waiting to claim its next victims.